Hello everybody, today we are going to discuss Indigo by Louis Fischer. And here in this story, the writer is actually talking of self-reliance, help to sharecroppers and Indian independence. So the main idea here, the main purpose is to tell us the contribution of Mahatma Gandhi in all these things, which actually this began as the help to sharecroppers, and then how it contributed to Indian independence and how he taught self-reliance to the people there, to the peasants there. So that's what the writer is talking about. And all this is being like whatever Gandhiji did, how he went to Champaran, how he eliminated the sharecropping system there. So all this is being told or narrated to us by whom? Louis Fischer. That means a foreigner is telling us about Gandhiji, what he was, what he did, and how he did. So let's see that how he conveys all that thing. So the writer says that when I first visited Gandhiji at his ashram in Sevagram, central India, so that was the matter of 1942, and Gandhiji told him that I'll tell you how I happened towards the departure of British from India, and that was in 1917. So actually what was the case that Gandhiji had gone to attend the December 1916 annual convention of Indian National Congress, and it was in 1916 there were 2,301 delegates, that is representatives. So many representatives were there and several other people were also there. So during the proceedings, when it was going on, so what happened? A peasant looking like, that is a farmer, looking like any other farmer of India, very thin and emaciated, very lean, lanky, came to Gandhiji and said that I am Rajkumar Shukla and I am from Champaran. Means introduced himself and told that from where he had come. And Gandhiji didn't know much about Champaran, perhaps hadn't heard. So he explained that it is in the foothills of towering Himalayas and near the kingdom of Nepal. Okay, fine, no problem at all. He didn't know much about that. Okay. Now what happened, this Champaran peasants, the farmers, they were sharecroppers. So under an ancient arrangement, so it was an ancient arrangement, and these Champaran peasants were sharecroppers, and Shukla, Rajkumar Shukla, was one of them. He was illiterate but resolute. Now resolute means determined or firm determination. Now why has the narrator called him resolute? We must know, because this can be asked. So the question here is, why has Shukla been called a resolute? Why has Shukla been called a resolute person? That is a man of firm determination. So the things are coming up. He went to that annual convention to complain about the injustice to the sharecroppers. And someone told him, go and talk to Gandhiji, speak to Gandhiji. Okay, no problem. Okay, he went. Now, Gandhiji said, I have an appointment in Kanpur. Now, see how he has spelled that. It is Cawnpore. That is the spelling of Kanpur here. And the reason is, Louis Fischer is the writer, and they pronounce it like that, Kanpur, Singapore and all like that. So that's how it is spelled in this way. So Gandhiji said that I have an appointment in Kanpur and I have to go to several other parts of India. So, okay, Shukla followed Gandhiji. Wherever he went, Shukla was after him. Finally, Gandhiji returned to his ashram near Ahmedabad. Now he begged, fix a date, please. Now, it has been a lot of roaming and wandering. Now he wanted him to fix a date. Okay, so impressed by that peasants, that farmers' story and tenacity. Tenacity, stubbornness. So Gandhiji was impressed by him and he said, okay, I am to be in Calcutta on such and such a date. You come there, meet me there and take me from there. Okay, fine, done. Now here you might have understood that why Shukla has been called a resolute person. The reason was he didn't leave Gandhiji until he agreed to visit his village. That was the reason. Okay, Gandhiji arrived, Shukla was already there, he was waiting, and when he waited until Gandhiji was free, and when he got free, both of them boarded the train to Patna. Okay, in the train they were moving. Now, there he took him to Rajendra Prasad's house, you might know, the first president of India. But at that time, he was neither the president of India nor of Congress. He was just a simple lawyer and he was out of town. And his servants, Rajendra Prasad's servants, they knew Shukla as a poor yeoman, a worker who works on land and so. So they knew him as a poor yeoman who pestered their master about the problems of the peasants. So pestered, that is troubled, bothered. So what they didn't entertain him and they thought Gandhiji to be one such person, so they didn't entertain both of them, let them stand there. Now what? Gandhiji was not allowed to draw water from the well because lest the entire source be polluted. You know, in those times casteism and untouchability, all these things were prevailing. So they thought that he might be some untouchable or so, or what. Then if they allowed the entire source be polluted, and they would have to do something like purification and so. So how would they know that he was not an untouchable? And now here what we have, another question, that how was Gandhiji treated at Rajendra Prasad's house? How was Gandhiji treated at Rajendra Prasad's house? And the answer is now very much clear. You know how was he treated. Now what happened? From there they went to Muzaffarpur, which was en route to Champaran. Okay, and to collect more information actually, and Gandhiji sent a telegram to Professor G.B. Kriplani of Arts College, whom he had already met at Tagore Shantiniketan. Means they knew each other. They had already met where? Shantiniketan. And you might have heard about Shantiniketan. So the train arrived at midnight, 15th April 1917. And Kriplani was there with a large body of students. So his disciples, he was there to receive Gandhiji. And there Gandhiji stayed for 2 days at the house of Professor Malkani. So he was received by Kriplani and he stayed at the house he was hosted by Malkani. So that was the case. And it is said that it was extraordinary for Professor Malkani to harbor Gandhiji in those times. So why was it extraordinary? You can see that here we have discussed all these things. So now we are here at this point. So why was it extraordinary? That we must know. And so the question is, why was it extraordinary for Professor Malkani to harbor Gandhiji? Harbor means to provide shelter. So why was it extraordinary? Answer is very much clear. In smaller localities, people were afraid to show sympathy to the advocates of home rule. And Gandhiji was the advocate, that is, supporter, the champion. So he was the supporter of home rule, and to the British, all those who supported home rule or such kind of things, they were like traitors and rebels. And so, those who would help Gandhiji would also be rebel. They would be caught, they could be punished, they could be put into prison, all that. And in Malkani's case, Malkani was a government servant. He could lose his job, and he was doing at such a higher risk of losing his job. So that was the reason that it is said it was extraordinary. Now what? The news of Gandhiji's advent. Advent means arrival. So it reached Muzaffarpur and all the neighboring villages actually. And people from all the neighboring villages went to see their champion on foot or whatever conveyance they got. Means whatever was possible for them, they did manage that. And the lawyers also went to Gandhiji. They reported the size of their fee. They briefed that actually they represented their cases at the court, and they reported the size of their fee. Now Gandhiji chided. Chided means scolded the lawyers for collecting such a big fee. He said, I've come to a conclusion. What? It's no use. It's no use taking their cases to the court where the peasants are so crushed and fear-stricken. Important is to free them from fear. That is more important. Otherwise, it's no use taking their cases to the courts and just representing their cases, because ultimately nothing will happen to them. It won't help actually. That's what he was trying to say. And so he said, let us first free them from fear. Now most of the arable land, arable is porous. So most of the arable land in Champaran was divided into large estates, which was owned by the British landlords and worked upon by Indian farmers. And the chief commercial crop was indigo. And the landlords compelled the peasants to grow indigo in the 15% or 3/20th part of their holdings, and the entire harvest was to be surrendered as rent. Now this was done by a long-term agreement. So this is quite an important thing for us, and you must know because it has been asked several times in your exams. And so the question here is, what were the terms of agreement between the peasants and the landlords? What were the terms of agreement between the peasants and the landlords? And this can be asked in another way as well, that what was the sharecropping system in Champaran? And the answer is same, common. So, what we just discussed. Now what happened? Germany had developed synthetic indigo. So soon this news actually came, and first it came to the landlords. So when they came to know that Germany had developed synthetic indigo, what they did, they thereupon sought agreements from the peasants. It means they just drafted an agreement, and accordingly what? They asked the peasants to pay them, to free them from that 15% arrangement. Means they said, okay, you pay us and we'll free you from this 15% arrangement. Now, this system actually was irksome. Irksome means troublesome for many, so they signed willingly, that they thought, okay, it's good that they are freeing us, so let's sign. And those who opposed, they engaged lawyers. And here the landlords, they appointed thugs. That means by hook or by crook, anyway, we must do it. We must get the documents or the things signed, and we must get money from these people. Now all this had happened, and then what happened? All this was going on, and meanwhile the news came to the unlettered peasants. So now when they came to know about this, they wanted their money back. It was a kind of cheating, because the landlords had to free them anyhow. They had to free them. Why? Because that 15% land would be of no use if the synthetic indigo was developed. Now that land would be of no use, because that was easier. There would be that they wouldn't have to engage the land and time and money and everything for that indigo. Now they can get it in a cheap manner from the factories itself. So that's why they had to free that land. And what they did, they didn't tell them and just sought money from them. So all this hue and cry was happening, and Gandhiji arrived in the scene. And he just came there, and what he did, he started by collecting facts. He started inquiry, he started by collecting facts. First he went to the Secretary of British Landlords Association and asked the information. So Secretary said, see, you are an outsider and we can give no information to an outsider. See how strange. An outsider was telling Gandhiji, an insider, that you are an outsider, so we cannot give any information to an outsider. How strange. Now Gandhiji, of course, tried to convince him, but it was of no use. It was of no use. Who was going to listen? Now what, from there he went to the Chief Commissioner of Tirhut Division. And Chief Commissioner, he was 2 steps ahead of this secretary. So Commissioner bullied Gandhiji. Bullied means threatened. So he at once bullied Gandhiji and forthwith advised him to leave Tirhut. But Gandhiji was not a man to be bullied like that. He instead, what he did, went to Motihari, the capital of Champaran. And there a large body of lawyers greeted him at the station, and what happened from there, he went to a house, making that his headquarters, started his inquiry. So that's what he did. And here we just talking of these things, headquarters, and started his inquiry and investigation. Now what happened, he came to know there a peasant in the neighboring village had been maltreated, ill-treated. So Gandhiji thought of going there. What he did, he set out on an elephant back. And while he was going, what happened, on the way, he was overtaken by an SP's, superintendent's messenger. And he asked Gandhiji to turn back. Gandhiji complied, that is, agreed. Now, back in the town, he handed Gandhiji with an official note to quit Champaran. Gandhiji was asked or ordered to quit Champaran. Now, Gandhiji took the note, but he wrote on its back, what? I will disobey the order. Now, see, disobeying a government order to leave. It was kind of a shock to all, and what happened, just as a reaction to that, is all got up and down by this kind of reaction from Gandhiji. And then what, Gandhiji received summons. Gandhiji was summoned to court, and Gandhiji he remained awake the whole night. Now this was a cause of tension. He didn't sleep. He remained awake the whole night. He sent a telegram to Rajendra Prasad to come with some of his influential friends. That, okay, come with your gang. And on a lighter note. So he asked them to come with some influential friends, and sent a letter to Ashram and wired the full report to the Viceroy. Now, Viceroy is the representative of a government, like he was a representative of the British government. So, sent the report to the Viceroy, and the next morning saw Motihari bleak with peasants. Now, black, why and how? So, of course, the writer is a foreigner, and to foreigners, all Indians are black. So, that was the reason he has termed that Motihari. Actually, what happened, the people there, the peasants and those people, they didn't know much about Gandhiji. They didn't know his past records in South Africa or so. They hadn't much knowledge about that. They only knew that a Mahatma had come and to solve their problems, and he was in trouble with the authorities. So, okay, now if the Mahatma himself was in trouble, so let's go and do something. So they all came out of their houses, and it was the very first instance in the whole of Motihari or Champaran that so many peasants had come out of their houses, thousands, and it was a proof of their liberation from the fear of the British. Liberation, liberty, freedom, emancipation. So it was a proof of that. Now what? Those officers, they were helpless. Now what to do? They had never faced such a crowd. So they felt helpless in controlling the crowd without Gandhiji's help. And Gandhiji, he was humble and polite. So he helped them in regulating the crowd, but though he helped, but the thing is different. What? Actually, he had given them the concrete proof. What? That their might, hitherto dreaded and unquestioned, could be challenged by the Indians. Yes. Hitherto, so far there was nobody to question their power, their might. It was dreaded, people feared, people were afraid. But now Indians have come out of their houses, come forward to challenge it, their power. And here, what these officers, they were all baffled, that is confused. They were all confused, and they asked the magistrate to postpone the trial. That, okay, just put it off now. They didn't know what would happen. It had got very serious and risky situation now. So many people were there with Gandhiji to support him, and it could turn out like anything. Apparently, they wanted to consult to their superiors. Means in that grim and serious situation, they didn't want to do anything without consulting to their seniors or superiors. And Gandhiji that day was in full form. What? He protested the delay. He said, no, I won't have any delay. He asked them to do what? He asked magistrate not to postpone anything, not to delay anything. And he said, actually what? He was caught in a conflict. He said he was caught in a conflict of duties. And what was that conflict of duties? He said on one side he didn't want to set a bad example as a lawbreaker, and on the other side he wanted to do national and humanitarian service. But the problem was, if he had to do that national and humanitarian service, he would have to break the law, and if he didn't break the law, then he wouldn't be able to do that national service. So that was the problem he was caught within. And we have a question on this here, that what was the conflict? What was the conflict of duties Gandhiji felt himself caught? So what was the conflict of duties Gandhiji felt himself caught in? And answer is very much clear. I had explained everything. Now what happened, Gandhiji, he said, actually I chose to break the law. Why? Because he heard the voice of his conscience. And so what he said, okay, if I am guilty, punish me. Okay, I am ready to have the punishment. He asked the penalty due. So this is how he presented himself in that situation before the magistrate. The magistrate said that he would pronounce the judgment after 2 hours recess. And for those 120 minutes, he asked Gandhiji if he wanted to stay out. So he asked him to furnish the bail. Gandhiji refused. Now bail, you know, that paid leave that you pay and you can go out of the prison. Gandhiji refused. Now, okay, he said, okay, you can go without bail. What else he could do? See, that much support was there with him. All the people there of Champaran and the neighboring villages were there to support him. With him, they were there. The magistrate was helpless and he allowed Gandhiji to be out. Now, when the court was reconvened, the magistrate said that he would declare the judgment after several weeks, and meanwhile he allowed Gandhiji to be at liberty. Gandhiji, free. No worries, no issues. And so Gandhiji was free. Now here what happened, Maulana Mazrul Haq, Brij Kishore Babu, Rajendra Prasad and several other lawyers, as he had already written to Rajendra Prasad to come with influential friends. So all these people came and they conferred with Gandhiji, that is, they consulted, discussed. And Gandhiji asked them, what would you do if I go to jail? They said, simple. If you go to jail, we to home. Now he said, then what about the problem to the injustice to the sharecroppers? What about that? So they then thought, okay, yes, that's true. So they withdrew to consult. They discussed among themselves. And Rajendra Prasad has recorded the upshot of those consultations. So upshot, that is result. Now what happened, they discussed and they said that Gandhiji was a stranger there and yet he was ready to go to jail for the sake of those peasants, farmers, that he had come from somewhere else on the request and he was ready to go to jail. And we who belong to the adjoining districts, to the neighboring ones, and represent their cases in the law courts. So if we leave them at this point, that would be a shameful desertion. I'm pronouncing it as desertion because desertion means abandoning. And desert, when you pronounce it as desert, desert is, D-E-S-E-R-T, desert is the sandy land. And when you pronounce the same word as desert, that means to abandon. So here it is desertion. So they all together went to Gandhiji and said, okay, we are ready to follow you into jail. And so here, this is what we have to, we are discussing. That we are ready to follow you into jail. And Gandhiji, at that point, Gandhiji said, okay, if you are with me, then no problem, that the battle of Champaran is won. He took a piece of paper and divided them into pairs, like who would do what and all that, and also told them how to quote arrest, how to get arrested, that it means. Now, after a few days, Gandhiji received a written communication from the magistrate. And what was that? That the Lieutenant Governor of the province had decided to drop the case against him. Civil disobedience had triumphed for the first time in modern India. So yes, that was the first victory, that the case against him was dropped and all the charges against him were taken back. So yes, an important one. So the question here is, which incident points to the first victory of civil disobedience which incident points to the first victory of civil disobedience in modern India? So this is the question, and I think it is very much clear to you that which incident actually. So this, that the case against him was dropped, and it was actually with the help of those peasants, those farmers, that they all came out together to support Gandhiji, and finally the case, and that too without using any violence. Here it is civil disobedience, so we need to emphasize this thing, that without using any violence, it was all dropped. Now what happened? Gandhiji and his lawyer friends, they started a far-flung inquiry into the grievances of the peasants. Grievances, that means their problems, sorrows. And so what? 10,000 depositions were taken down. And they made notes, whatever the problems were, they made notes, all was taken down, written down. And the whole area throbbed with the activity of the peasants, because they were all actively engaged in that. And on the other side, the landlords, they vehemently protested. Actually, they could see the power was going away. The peasants were coming up, they were raising their head. So it was like losing their hold and control. So what happened? These landlords protested. Now in June, Gandhiji received an invitation from Sir Edward Gate, the Lieutenant Governor. He was called by Edward Gate. Before going, Gandhiji met his leading associates and he told them, if I don't return, then what? You have to follow that civil disobedience. He met his leading associates and laid detailed plans for civil disobedience. And there what happened? He had four protracted interviews. Protracted means long interviews that means meetings with Sir Edward Gate, and as a result, an inquiry was set up. And as usual, what happens, we know that in such cases, when some problem occurs, inquiry is set up, and inquiry then goes on doing its work. So in that inquiry commission, there were representatives from the government, of the landlords, and Gandhiji was the sole representative of those peasants. Only Gandhiji, the single one. And here Gandhiji says that the visit undertaken, actually he stayed in Champaran for 7 uninterrupted months and then paid several shorter visits. The visit undertaken at the entreaty means request. Actually he had visited Champaran on the request of that Shukla. And he couldn't have thought that this could take or occupy 1 full year of his life. And yes, that happened. Now finally what happened? The inquiry brought a crushing mountain of evidences against the big planters. That means the result was all against those landlords, and they thereupon agreed to pay the refund. They agreed in principle, we are ready to pay, but how much shall we pay? Now they thought Gandhiji would demand full amount in refund, whatever they had illegally and deceitfully extorted from the peasants. Extorted means just snatched away, taken forcefully. But Gandhiji said 50%. And there he seemed adamant. Reverend J.Z. Hodge is telling us all this about. So he was adamant at 50%. It seemed that he won't budge, he won't move back. So the representative of the planters said that we can give you only 25%. We can't give you 50%, we can only. So Gandhiji accepted even that, 25%. Now why? Was he a fool to accept that? Why did he do that? He cheated those peasants or what? So he accepted even that, thus breaking the deadlock, the stalemate situation which was lingering, going on. He accepted that. So here, of course, we have a question on this, and the question is that why did Gandhiji accept 25% refund? So why did, you can see it accepted 25%. So why did he do that? Why did? So Gandhiji, now this decision actually was accepted unanimously. All agreed on that. Gandhiji said the amount was not important. Important was what? That the landlords were obliged to part with their money and with that part with their prestige. So that was more important, prestige. That first time they were losing a fight. Before that, they behaved as lords above the law and said laws are not for them. They can make their own laws or something like that. It was the situation above laws, above law. But now Gandhiji taught those peasants that they too have rights. They too have defenders, and the peasants. So courage. They got courageous. Actually, what he wanted to show them that you can also win and these people can be defeated. Otherwise, what if in the very first attempt they would be defeated, then perhaps there would be no coming back. There would be no uniting back. There would be no fighting back. The unity would shatter in the very first time. And then it would take again 100 or 200 years to again unite and come back. And so he wanted to show them you can also win, and events justified Gandhiji's position. Means the decision taken by him proved to be right. How? The landlords, actually the landlords first, the landlords just vacated those places, they left, they abandoned their estates, which were reverted to the farmers. Indigo sharecropping disappeared. So what he thought, the vision, he had some vision, he could foresee things, and it proved to be right. And now what? Gandhiji was not like usual politicians. He never contented, never satisfied himself with large political and economic solutions of the problems, just as the other politicians do, just in talks, like men of words only, not of deeds. So he was not like that. He saw the social and cultural backwardness of Champaran villages, that they were really very backward. And he wanted to do something for them. And so he appealed to his disciples. And Mahadev Desai and Narhari Parekh, who had recently joined him as his disciples, came forward with their wives and children. Okay, that they were ready. They came forward. And then several others from Bombay, Pune and other parts of the country. And then came Devdas. See, I'm not talking of that Devdas of the movie. Devdas, his youngest son, the fourth son. And with him, Kasturbai, Gandhiji's wife. They opened 6 schools, primary schools in 6 villages. And Kasturbai taught them lessons and cleanliness, hygiene and sanitation. So all that was taught. Now, here is one more important thing, and that is the health conditions. And the health conditions were really very miserable, very appalling. And we have a question on this as well. So, that I can move on to this one and see, here it is. How were the health conditions in how were the health conditions in Champaran? So it was quite, we can say, funny and strange. So Gandhiji requested a doctor to offer his services. And what happened actually, that there were, for all diseases and problems, they had 3 medicines. If anybody showed clotted tongue, that means bleeding tongue, he would be given what? Castor oil. If anybody had malaria, you can see, I think, yes. If anybody had malaria, he would be given quinine plus castor oil. If anybody had skin eruptions, he would be given sulfur ointment plus castor oil. So whatever you have, castor oil will definitely be there. So that was the case. And what happened? The women's condition was also very bad. And Gandhiji talked to Kasturbai about the filthy state of women's clothing. Filthy means dirty. I mentioned it here. You can see this filthy state of women. So he saw the filthy state, that is dirty state of women's clothing, and he asked Kasturbai to talk to them. A woman took her into her hut and showed that no boxes, no shelves, where to keep the clothes, and the sari I am wearing is the only one. So miserable, so wretched, so poor. Now, Gandhiji kept a close distant watch during even his long stay in Champaran. He kept a close watch at his ashram. And once what he did, he sent a letter to the residents of the ashram, and he told them now it's time to close the old latrine trenches and to dig out new ones. Otherwise, the old ones would start smelling bad. Now, what is this? Why this example, latrine trenches and all? Did he get no other example to quote here? Of course, there is nothing to prove the smelling capacity of Gandhiji. Yeah. Here it is to tell us that nothing was unimportant or insignificant or trivial for Gandhiji. Everything was equally important for him. He took notice of each and everything. Nothing escaped his notice. So that is what the writer is trying to tell us here in this, through this example. Champaran episode proved to be a turning point in Gandhiji's life. Now, this is an important question for us because this has been asked several times and can also again be asked. So, of course, we must know and practice this. The question is, how did the Champaran episode prove to be a turning point in Gandhiji's life? So how it proved to be a turning point? So answer is very much clear. And what is that? You need to summarize this chapter actually, because how did it prove to be turning point? So how will you explain? Right from the beginning, you will mention all his achievements actually, which brought him to the forefront of Indian independence struggle. So that's how it turned out to be, we can say, a turning point, proved to be a turning point in his life. So this is how we'll mention. Gandhiji said, I didn't do something big. I simply said that you can't order me about in my own country. Now see, that won't do. You foreigners and in my country, you will order me. That won't do. So this is what I did, he said. And it didn't start as an act of defiance. It was not that Gandhiji went and directly just going there, he said that I won't obey this, I won't obey that, I'll defy this. So it didn't start like that. It started as an act of alleviation. Actually, he started that movement to alleviate the distress of the thousands of millions of peasants there. So it was like that. Alleviation means what? To lessen, and distress is, of course, sorrow and disappointment. So it starts as an act of alleviation, alleviate the distress of peasants. And this was the typical Gandhi pattern. Now, what was the typical Gandhi pattern? His politics were intertwined with the day-to-day problems of the millions. His loyalty was not to the abstractions, but his loyalty was to living human beings. Now, what does this mean? He was not a man of words, he was a man of deed. His loyalty was not to abstractions, just to imaginary ideas and thoughts. He actually was loyal to the people. He would do for them, he would work for them. And that was his pattern. He was bound to those people. He felt a connection with those people and he worked for them. So here we have this important question, that what was the typical Gandhi pattern? So, what was the typical Gandhi pattern? So, these two lines which I just quoted, these are to be mentioned here. And now in the last we have the Charles Freer Andrews thing, means his incident, or we can say his part, has been mentioned here. So this Charles Freer Andrews was a British pacifist, and he was, we can say, a strong follower of Gandhiji. He was a fan of Gandhiji, a devotee of Gandhiji. He was like that. And he had to go to Fiji Island on an official tour. So before leaving, he went to Gandhiji to take his leave. Okay, that farewell, tata, bye, and all that sort of thing. Now, Rajendra Prasad and the other lawyers, they thought it would be good if he joined their side. And he was ready for that if Gandhiji agreed or accepted. But Gandhiji vehemently protested, strongly protested. He said, you think that it would be great if an Englishman joins our side. It shows the weakness of your heart. You're butterfingered, chicken-hearted. Means how weak you are that you want a British to join our side to fight against them. That what would it do? Just one person against those British, what would it do? So he said, the cause is just, and we must rely on ourselves to win the battle. Be self-reliant, self-dependent. You shouldn't seek a prop in Mr. Andrews because he happens to be an Englishman. Prop, support. We don't need support of Mr. Andrews. See, we ourselves can do it. We don't need his support. That's what he said. So Rajendra Prasad writes here that he had read our minds and we had no reply to that. Of course, Gandhiji understood what they were thinking, and so he said so. Now, what else, or what could they do now? What could they answer for this? In this way, Gandhiji taught them self-reliance, that be self-reliant, depend on yourself. So self-reliance, Indian independence, and help to sharecroppers were all bound together. How? So this is the line, and we must add one thing here. What? How? And this becomes a long answer type question for you. So you must know the answer. Again, the whole chapter is there because it started with what? Sharecroppers problem. Then it moved further to Indian independence struggle and the first victory of civil disobedience. That is to be included. And the self-reliance, how he taught self-reliance to Rajendra Prasad and the other lawyers. And we can also include the case of the peasants, that how he taught them that you have rights and defenders, and then they came forward, and so that can also be included in self-reliance. So these are the things which are to be mentioned here. And apart from all the questions we have discussed so far, there are some more. So you can see your second question here after the chapter, and that is, how did Gandhiji influence the lawyers? So how did he influence that he was ready to go to jail for the sake of those peasants? That is what you have to mention here. You don't have to pick out instances as given in the question. And second thing is, freedom from fear is more important. That thing which is given in the talking about the text. So you must prepare an answer for that as well. So these are the questions in this chapter. From this chapter, you need to prepare these ones only. Apart from these, nothing will be asked. I can guarantee that. So just prepare accordingly and rest will follow. Thank you.